Trying to catch up with some of the Grotmas Detachments, we are taking a look today at the second best of the knightly themed Marines, which is of course the Black Templars, Dark Angels naturally being the first. But the Black Templars are cool, I do like them quite a lot, they've got a really gorgeous model range, and they came into 10th edition with what I personally thought was quite a cool, fun and flexible detachment with their Templar Vows. And the Grotmas detachment they got, which is the Wrathful Procession, that instead aims to give you even more choice and even more flexibility on a per battle round basis with their rule Zealous Litanies. Now this is a rule that allows you at the start of each battle round to pick one of 3 buffs, and these bring a benefit to all of your infantry and mounted units. So it is specifically just your dudes on foot and on bikes and that sort of thing. This detachment doesn't do anything of note for your vehicles. So anything like Land Raiders or Repulsors or Gladiators and even Dreadnoughts, they may feel a little bit like they've got the short end of the stick with this one. But to make up for that, the buffs your infantry and mounted units do get are quite good. Chorus of Relentless Hate grants plus 2 inches to your movement and plus 1 inch to your advance rolls for your units. Rite of Perfervid Wrath grants you plus 1 strength on your melee weapons, whilst the Chant of Deathless Devotion gives your models a 5-up invulnerable save. So on the base of it, this does allow you to get some really significant bonuses to your movement, your melee output, and your durability. And the fact that it is done and chosen on a battle round basis means it is very easy to set this up to benefit you the absolute most. If you want to move up as fast as possible in the first turn, you can get that extra movement. Whilst if you are in turn 2 or 3 and expecting to make a charge or be charged by the enemy, put that plus 1 strength on your guys and get yourself some strength 6 2 damage power weapon attacks from your sword brethren. It is just very flexible and customizable, and you really can change it with how the battle is going to get you the most benefit. It really is just a very handy way to chop and change which buffs you are going to be getting on a battle round by battle round basis. So I do like it for that flexibility. I think my biggest complaint about it is that whilst they are good buffs for sure, I'm not entirely sure that they beat the bigger, more widespread buffs that the Templar Vows bring. Getting yourself an army-wide 6-up Feel No Pain or army-wide lethal or sustained hits on all of your melee weapons is really, really good. And I think that yes, whilst the Zealous Litanies are more customizable, your Templar Vows, if you go with that detachment, they are set for the whole battle, but you do get to choose them at the start of the first battle round, so you can still see what the enemy has brought to the game. You can still see if the opponent is going vehicle heavy or has loads of infantry or is bringing a load of psychers, so you can still make that detachment work for you in a way that is going to benefit you the most. So from that perspective, it is still a very flexible and customizable one itself. For me, whilst I do think that getting a 5-up invuln or some bonus movement on your infantry and bike units is, yes, very, very helpful, you can definitely get some micro level play to suit each situation. But for me personally, I would rather most of the time anyway, just set myself a nice, easy, army-wide buff that would either give everything I was taking that extra bit of durability, or just make, my infantry, my dreadnoughts, even my tanks, just that little bit scarier in melee with lethal or sustained hits. So I'm not saying Zealous Litanies are bad. I think they can be very, very strong. I just think it is quite a big trade to get rid of the Templar Vows for them. The enhancements on offer are all pretty solid though. Firebrand is fairly pricey at 25 points, but it goes on a Black Templar model and it grants him and his unit the Stealth rule, which is pretty great if you are running up the board rather than using a transport, which in this detachment is a lot more likely. Getting something like a Castellan and a full 20-man Crusader squad -1 to be hit can make it very, very difficult for your opponent to get rid of them before they manage to reach the enemy battle lines, especially when you have that potential 2 inches of extra movement from your Zealot litanies. Sacred Rage is the priciest enhancement at 30 points, but nets you the absolutely spectacular Fights First ability for the bearer and his unit. This is only once per battle, but if you get charged or your opponent is just going to activate first in a fight, this can be game changing. Letting your unit of Sword Brethren or Terminators just get those heavy hitting attacks in before the enemy can mean the difference between you wiping out the entire enemy unit or you losing your own unit. So this is, to be honest, a must take in my opinion on that one blob of fighty dudes that you really don't want to get caught off guard and risk them all being taken out before they get to do anything. Next up we have Terraman's Censor. This is 15 points, and what this does is it forces each enemy unit in engagement range of the bearer and his unit to take a battle shock test at the start of the fight phase, and the test is done at -1. So whilst I've said before battle shock isn't super reliable, the extra -1 to that roll does help, and this can actually have a really big impact. It can mean that the enemy can't use defensive stratagems, things like Armor of Contempt to keep them alive a bit more. It also means they potentially won't be able to interrupt you with that stratagem. So if that is something that they were really relying on and needed, that can be absolutely massive. I mean, that can be essentially in some circumstances as impactful as just having Fights First. So this can be really good. It may not be totally reliable because it is based on a battle shock test, but at just 15 points, I think it's so potentially handy that if you can find those 15 points floating around when you've come to the end of your army building, it's definitely worth trying to fit in. Finally, you get the Benediction of Fury. This grants the bearer, who does have to be a chaplain, devastating wounds on his melee weapons. So for 10 points, it's actually not awful. Getting something like a Terminator Chaplain, 5, Strength 7, -1 AP, 2 damage attacks, with +1 to wound in melee and also dev wounds now will definitely help them to punch through things like Terminators and Custodes a lot more reliably. So not super expensive. It can easily be slotted in with a spare 10 points that you have lying around, and it will just help one of your characters do that bit more in melee. So the enhancements are all pretty solid, I would say. I do like all of them to at least some degree, and I do think that you will be bringing 3 of them in some mix in most games. The stratagems, however, do have a couple of duds in them. As always, we're not going to go on about Armor of Contempt. It's here, -1 AP to a single set of incoming melee or ranged attacks. It's good, it's not as good as it used to be, but it is still good, and it does combo really well with things like the Firebrand enhancement to just make a unit incredibly resilient. But moving on to the actual unique stratagems, Fueled by Faith is the first, and this one lets you pick a unit after a mortal wound has been allocated to it, and then for the rest of that phase, that unit gets a 5-up Feel No Pain against mortals. So it can be really handy if the enemy has a load of mortal wound output. Some armies, you will find yourself using this pretty much as often as you can, but equally, there are some armies that have next to no mortal wound output whatsoever, and in those cases, this strat is essentially going to feel like a wasted slot. So it can be really good when you need it, but it is quite a niche situational one. Brute Fervor is next. This allows you in the fight phase to pick a unit of yours that hasn't fought yet, and they get to reroll hit rolls of 1, which is good. They also get to ignore any hit or wound modifiers. So if you are going into something like Sanguinary Guard with a character who can get -1 to be hit and to be wounded, you will still be doing just absolutely fine. Your Sword Brethren will still be hitting on 3s, re-rolling 1s, and then wounding on 3s instead of hitting and wounding on 4s. So it can make a big difference to your outputs, and there are some targets in the game with the right set of buffs and strats that can get you both -1 to hit and to wound. So that can be really impactful on your melee output. So this can help counter that really well. There are some situations where it's not going to come into effect at all, but even in those situations, just getting rerolls of 1 is quite nice when you're usually hitting on 3s. So this is just all round a fairly solid melee strat, I think. Relentless Momentum grants you the option to pick a unit that hasn't fought and is within engagement range of the enemy, and your models that are within 3 inches can fight, rather than just those that are within an inch or in base-to-base contact like the core rules dictate. So potentially this does mean an entire 20-man unit of Crusaders could get to fight. The strat is quite verbose in its wording, so you can't just use it to move off and go and try and tag a load of other things you aren't in combat with. It does state you have to target a unit that is within 3 inches and that your unit is within engagement range of, so it does have some limitations. But essentially, getting over double the engagement range for your models on those big blobs is super, super good for Black Templars, and it is going to let you live out your Orc Green Tide fantasies until your heart's content. Castigate the Demagogues is up next. This one gives a unit in the fight phase precision on their melee attacks. It's brilliant if you've charged into an enemy unit with a character in and you just want to try and single them out and take them down. Throwing something like a load of power sword attacks from your sword brethren will probably kill most enemy HQs that are hidden in a unit, so this can be really good if you need to take out an enemy character as soon as possible. It's not super flashy, but getting precision when you need it for just 1 command point can be very, very clutch. Finally, you also get Voice of Devotion. This one has some use, but it also kind of annoys me. It lets you, in your command phase, pick a litany from the Detachment rule, and a single infantry or mounted unit from your army gains that instead of the one you've chosen at the start of the battle round. Now, yes, this does have a lot of use. If you've got a load of stuff that wants to be moving up the board and getting that 2 inches of extra movement, but you've got a unit that really needs to stay on an objective and needs to survive, you can just use this to get that 5-up invuln on them whilst the rest of your army gets that extra movement. But it really annoys me that you lose the original litany on them. It does replace it, so the unit that you give the 5-up invuln to now won't have that extra movement for the battle round. It might not make a huge difference most of the time, but I just wish it kind of said this strat gives them the extra litany in addition to any others chosen, because I'm sure that's what most strats do. Things like the Predatory Imperative for the NIDS invasion fleet, that just gives the extra rule on top of. In fact, I'm pretty sure that the other Black Templars detachment gives an extra Templar vow on top of the one you've chosen. So it just, I don't know, this just feels like it's giving you with one hand and taking away from another, which for 1 CP just kind of annoys me. I don't think it would have exactly been a broken stratagem if it gave you the extra litany on top. It is a minor thing. I just think it would have been quite cool if you could have had one unit that, you know, maybe had a 5-up invuln and +1 strength as they were charging into combat. So a few decent strats. Armor of Contempt is the same as usual. There are some good strats here, but there's a few that just kind of make me go, oh, I wish this was a little bit better. There's none here that are out and out amazing. There's no advance and charge, which for an army like Black Templars would have been fantastic. And it just feels like there isn't that one strat that you just think is, wow, that's the one that I'm going to be using all the time to really get the most out of this detachment. Which is a shame, because I think as a whole, it does have a lot of good stuff going for it. It just feels like it hits the sort of, 6 or 7 out of 10 category where it's good. There's a load of usable stuff, but it doesn't quite break into the 8 or 9. This is great. There's a load here that is going to be really fun and cool and powerful to play with, which I think a lot of the other Grotmas detachments did have. So I'm not saying it's a bad detachment. It just feels okay. And that is a little bit disappointing in some situations. I hate to say that something that is okay is disappointing, but compared to some of the other Grotmas detachments and compared to even the other Black Templar detachment, which I think is good, being just okay kind of makes it feel a little bit worse than it otherwise would. And that's the Black Templars' new Wrathful Procession. As I said, I do think it's got potential. I do think it is overall maybe a little bit more flexible than Righteous Crusaders. I just think it's not quite as powerful. Giving up those army-wide lethal hits, sustained hits, or 6-up feel no pain, as well as some of the truly great enhancements that the Righteous Crusaders have, means that most of the time, if I was running Black Templars, I would probably just pick Righteous Crusaders. But as always, what do you make of the new Black Templars detachment, and how do the Zealous Litanies, in your opinion, compared to the Templar Vows? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do like and subscribe for more Warhammer content from me, but until next time, I'll catch you later, guys.